So he worked 4 hours, and then he was off for 4 hours, and the same with me. 4 hours working and 4 hours off. And the food was unfortunately contaminated, and I got food poisoning. So I had to get off the ship when it got to New Orleans. I couldn't stop, I was throwing up, and I was working 4 hours on, 4 hours off, because there was no choice. Anyway, so I was in a hospital in New Orleans for a couple of weeks. And then I was assigned to the base in New Orleans. And it's funny, when I was in the hospital, the Jewish women in New Orleans found out somehow that I was Jewish, and they came to visit me. So when I heard they were coming, I would go into another room or another direction, because I didn't want a Jewish woman to come up and say, I was no hero. I was just schlepping along, with the flow. And I was just sort of ashamed that they would want to see me.
So did you meet them?
No, I never met them, I didn't want any kavod, because I didn't do anything. Anyway, while I was in New Orleans, I got assigned to this ship, the 1059, and there were 3 people on the ship. Myself, a radio operator, and another man from Chicago who was a yeoman, and who do you think the third man was? The captain. Go figure. Anyway, the captain had one of those complexes where the Jews are not good fighters, they're not doing enough, and so forth. So he had to prove that he was
the best.
Yeah. So as soon as we could get a couple of ships together, we would go to we head out to the Pacific. We would go to another island, Saipan, Inuitak.
What assignments? What plans were?
We were looking for the enemy. Supposedly there were submarines there, but no submarine's going to attack a little ship like this. They're going to go after a destroyer or something like that. So anyway, we never got into any fighting, because by the time we got there, the fighting was over. So finally, we got to an island, a big island in the Pacific called Guam. And this was it. We were going to be part of a big operation that was going to invade Japan. And that's when they dropped the atom bomb on Japan, and then the second atom bomb, and then the war was over. So so that's it.
Yeah, but still, being on the ship?
On the ship, I was fortunate in that I was a radio operator, and so I was like in touch with the world. But most of the duties, most of the messages were coded messages, and they weren't the way the message comes over the radio, and you listen and you see if it's for you or not. Every day your code changes. Like it's usually like 4 letters, like NAFX. And if NAFX is not in the salutation of the message, it's not for you. So you're required to copy maybe a couple of sentences, and then you could stop and listen. You know, you took the earphones off and put them around your neck, so you had to listen in case an emergency broke through. And so that's what, basically that's when, and then we, I remember when I got the news, like when Franklin Roosevelt died, the president, you know, I was like the...
Yeah, but for example, what did you know at that time about what was going in Japan? With the atom
I didn't
bomb?
have an overall comprehensive picture. Just had a very limited viewpoint of my duties on the ship.
Without knowing.
Without knowing, yes.
Without knowing.
Yeah.
Without having any rumors or anything like that.
No, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, an adult man not knowing what's going on. Well, I didn't read there were no newspapers to read. There was no mention on the radio frequencies. So I just...
Nothing was mentioned on the radio.
I remember when I was growing up, there was an article in the Reader's Digest called Address Unbekannte. It was a little short story about a man who was taken to a camp in Germany, and then they looked for him and they said they don't know where he lives anymore. You know, address unbekannte. But so I had a feeling, but for some reason I didn't internalize it. Isn't that disgusting?
No, the question is, you also did not know anything about what's going on in
I did
Japan.
not.
In Japan?
In Japan, no.
Nothing.
I mean,
About that.
I tell you, the atrocities of the Japanese became more obvious from movies, you know, from the little of the movies we saw. But the thing was, after the war was over, because our ship was had a very narrow draft. In other words, it could go into shallow waters. We were assigned to the United Nations Relief Association, and we took Japanese people from China and brought them back to Japan. See, the bottom of the ship, the hold, was a huge empty spot. That's where the soldiers in the tanks used to stay before the amphibious attack, before the landing. And so there was a big space, and we had we took Koreans back from China to Korea, 1,000 people. There were 4 children born on, it was a 4-day voyage, and 4 children, I remember, were born on one trip. So, and then we took, so I visited Japan, I visited Korea, and I visited parts of China, Beijing, and because our ship took very little water, we went up the Yangtze River and to Nanking and Hankow, and I rode up the river, and I would look out at the rail and see these bamboo castles. And I remembered as a child reading these stories written by W. Somerset Maugham. And I said, I'm here, I can't believe it. And you know what else was strange? The fellow I told you about that lived across the street and it was in the Navy, became a radio operator. He was on a battleship, and his ship was in Shanghai, China, and my ship was in Shanghai, China. And the fellow who lived next door to me was on an ocean-going tug, and his ship was in Shanghai, China. So these three Jewish guys from a very poor neighborhood in Newark, can you imagine sitting in a bar in Shanghai, China, you know, having a beer? It was just anyway, we went down, we also covered South, what they call it, French Indochina. They call it Vietnam now. And so we went there. So I tell
And
you.
how were you well received?
What?
Where were you well received in those places? Like
Well, yeah. I mean, but you know, I regret things. Like I should have found out if there was a shul in Shanghai, because I know there were some Chinese Jews, and I know there were Russians who escaped from escaped from Germany through China and Russia, and so. But I just shallow person. But anyway, so I spent maybe a year, and I became a third-class petty officer. That's like a sergeant. And I finished up service a little over 27 months, and I was back.
What year was that?
That was 46, July of 46. And then I was I was hanging around for a little bit. The government gave each veteran $20 a week for a year. We used to call it the 52-20 club, because 52 weeks for $20. And I would hang around. I remember one funny incident. I was telling my daughter today that we lived in a house that had 3 apartments, and we were in the middle, and the landlord lived on the top floor, and the landlord used to buy newspapers, and I was in the habit of going upstairs on his back porch and getting the old issues and reading them, and so it was a Friday morning, and I was reading the paper on the back porch, and my mother said, "Jack, could you go pick up the meat from the butcher?" So I said, "Sure." And she, a little while later, she came out. I was still reading. She said, "Jack, don't forget the butcher." I said, "Okay." And the third time she came out, you know, she's, "Jack, you have to go because I won't have time to kosher the meat." So I said to her, "So one time you won't kosher it." And she laughed, you know, it was such a funny thing. But anyway.
If I will ask you about what did it give you serving in the Navy? What did it?
Well, it was.
Did it change you in a way? Did it? You went to.
It was an incredible experience for a poor boy that had never been any place or traveled any place.
So the traveling itself.
It was amazing.
Was amazing.
And then also, I think it strengthened me, it taught me self-reliance because I was a very sort of a shelter. Even though I've been working all my life, I was sheltered. I never went any place. And also, I had to get over my seasickness, So overall, I think it helped me, and I felt that I had done my duty to this wonderful country of America that accepted my family, and I just thought it was the most wonderful country in the world, and I was glad to, as a Jewish person, to have done what I was supposed to do, and. So I was sort of loafing around for a couple of weeks, and then another friend of mine from high school came out and came over the house and said, the government is willing to send you to college. It's called the GI Bill, where they would finance your college. So. He said, it's like someone giving you $5,000, So in where I lived, there was a division of the state university, Rutgers University. So I went down to take the examination, and I passed. I was surprised, but I had to go back to high school because I didn't have all the college subjects. I took the business, so I went. So I was driving the bakery truck at the time, and one of the things that I had to do before getting okayed for college is to meet with a psychologist from the Newark College of Engineering to see if I qualified to be a college student. And he gave me all kinds of tests, and he said these tests you take for one afternoon a week for 3 weeks, and then he evaluates the test and decides what you should study, what should be your career, and so forth. So I said to him, I cannot take 3 afternoons off 3 weeks in a row. I said, you have to give me all the tests at one time. So he reluctantly agreed and gave me the tests. And then the tests were like, would you rather build a bridge or sell the bridge? Or I don't know, work on the bridge. So those kind of psychological questions. And when he finished, it was already dark, and he came out and he said to me, you should be a YMCA director. You know what that is? The Y, it's we have a Y here in Jerusalem. It's like a community center. Yeah. So I looked at him. I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "I signed up for Rutgers night college because I'm working during the day, and they only have 3 choices: finance, marketing, or accounting." And I figured finance and marketing sound like too general a field. Accounting was like a skill, a profession. So I signed up for that. So, so the psychologist says, no, you should be a YMCA director. I said, could you put accounting second? You know, so he agreed, and that's how come I became an accountant. And eventually, 6.5 years, I went to college at night, and I found out that I didn't have the right subjects for taking the CPA exam. And so as long as I had to take extra subjects and the government was paying for it, I took it in graduate school. So after 9.5 years, I had a master's degree, and I became an accountant. I left the truck and became an accountant and eventually a CPA.
Before, I want to take you back to 1948, when the Jewish state was recognized.
Right.
Was it an important event for you?
It was a very important event because I was single, and I was wondering, maybe I should go there, you know? I mean, maybe they need me, maybe, but I didn't. I just didn't get moved enough. I just feel bad about it when I think about it now. But it was.
But I would like to have as an event. As an
Yeah.
event.
As an event, I thought it was just remarkable. And I was so proud, you know, that it happened. But I didn't realize the background and the problems, you know, that existed.
Yeah.
You know, the history of it.
And when did you hear the first time about the tragedy of